Quite a few years ago, I took a bunch of kids on a retreat. I gave them each an 11 by 17 sheet of paper just like this, and I asked them to fold it toward the middle like that so they had sort of like barn doors. And as we went through the retreat, we talked about this outside being sort of the outside version of them. And we asked them at one point to make a depiction on the front with pictures or words. We had magazines, we had stickers, all kinds of stuff for them to work with. But on the front they were to put how you think others see you. And then a little bit while later in the retreat, we had them open the left door here, and on this half of this page, to write about how they saw themselves, or to make a depiction of that. Now for some of the kids this was pretty easy. On the outside they made their pictures, and on the inside they talked about how they saw themselves. But for some of them this was very difficult. To have to wrestle with some of the things that they had been called or people had said about them on the outside was hard. But then turning into the inside, this was like tears kind of difficult for a couple of them as they wrestled with terrible sense of who they were as people and struggling with their sense of self. So then we turned corners and we started to talk about God's love and God's grace, and God said that creation was good, and talking about how we are forgiven and blessed, beloved children of God. We talked about Jesus, all that stuff. And we said, okay, now open the other side and write about how do you think God thinks of you. Now we teed them up by telling them how we think God thinks of us, so hopefully this was a different, more positive picture as they went along. But the idea was that we would move through this outer sense of how people might judge us, and not always accurate perceptions, and then their own sense of who they were, and then trying to perhaps provide some sense of how God sees who we are. Today we hear a parable. In this parable, a master comes along and has these three slaves, and he invites them, or hands them, some of his resources. Talents is money, so he hands them money. One of them gets 5 talents, one of them gets 2 talents, one of them gets 1 talent, and then he just leaves. Doesn't give any directions. Comes back, and we find out that 2 of them did really well, and 1 did not. And I wondered what would happen if you took those 3 slaves on a retreat and went through this activity with them. And we don't know too much about the first 2, other than that they did well with the talents that they were given. But I think if you gave this to that 3rd slave and said, what do you think other people think about you? I don't know that it would be a great picture. Because at the beginning of the parable, we are told the first one is given 5 talents, the 1, 2, and the 1, 1, according to their ability. So I would bet that he had a sense that everybody else didn't think he had quite as much skill or confidence or whatever it is that differentiated that ability. So I'm not sure his outside cover here would be too positive. Then if we turned and said, how do you see yourself? Again, as the story unfolds, it's not a pretty picture you get, right? He's afraid of the master. He seems to have maybe a low sense of what he can do. He seems to have a limited sense of what he's able to do. We don't know why, right? It could be that the master has always treated him that way, and so he just gets a sense that he's limited. Or maybe he just doesn't understand and has never been given an opportunity to shine. He is only given 1 talent when the others are given more. But I wouldn't bet that he would have a lot of necessarily positive things to say here. Mostly fear and limitation. Now, if we were to say, what does your master think of you? At the end of the parable, we get a very clear picture of that. But even if we had asked that ahead of time, I'm not sure he would have had a positive sense of what the master thought of him. Why? Well, what does he think of the master? He's a harsh man, is what his thought is. And if you think the master is a harsh person, perhaps then what you think the master thinks of you is not going to be real positive. So I turned this week also and thought, what if we asked this question of Salem Lutheran Church? So I drew a little church on the front. And so if I were to ask us, what does the other people think of us? That's a more complicated question when you're a whole group of people, right? And so on the one hand, if I say, what do people think of us as Salem Lutheran Church in this community? There are some people who don't even know us, and so they wouldn't have much thought about us. There are others who have visited here and who have told me what a blessing this place is to them, and what a great spirit we have, and what great hospitality. So that might be part of what we put here on the outside. There are other people who are only here for, say, a funeral, or only here for a bit of vacation, and they experience that same sense of welcome, so they might have some positive things to say. But we are also not just a Lutheran church in this particular community. We are a Christian congregation. And what does the collective world these days think about the Christian church? Not always good things, right? And so they might say that we are mean-spirited. If you Google and say, why is the church, the first bunch of things that it wants to populate are not good things. So why is the church so mean-spirited? Judgmental, homophobic. There's all these negative things that get attached. Now, those are fair in some instances, but I would push back against them for us and say, well, we're not homophobic, and I don't think we're mean-spirited, and we're all hypocritical. That just happens. But, so on the front of this, we might have a little bit of a mixed bag. Some of it fair and some of it not fair. So if we were to open it up and then say, what do we see in ourselves, what would you put in there? Friendly, okay? Welcoming? Giving? Thankful? Anything else? Christian, yeah? Non-judgmental? That's all good. I'm going to share some of the conversations I've had in my time here. Some of you have walked with others of you through some terrible times in life. So, I don't know, we would maybe put supportive or, family, whatever that might be. But there's a couple others that I want to add. Every time we have a cantata, our choir makes this wonderful, joyful noise, and someone will say, we do pretty good for a small church, right? We have a sense, and I say today we did 57 boxes, and we go, yeah, that's pretty good for a small church. Do you all know how many churches are smaller than ours? Almost all of them. Really. Like if you drive up the hill, we are tiny, because there are two gigantic congregations up the hill. But I can't remember the exact statistic I saw recently, but something like 89% of congregations have less than 100 people. So we're not that small, but we do have a sense of being small. And that sense of being small then gives us a sense maybe of being limited and saying there's only so much we can do. So that's one thing. The other thing is, before many of you were here, but some of you were here for this congregation in the past had a serious debt problem. Happens in churches, right? You need to finance the building, and so you take on some debt. And when you have a debt problem, guess what every church meeting is about? Money. Is that fun? It is not fun. There have been times where the congregation's had a tough time paying the bills. Also not fun. So when you have experienced that in the life of the church, where every meeting you go to, which we ought to be talking about what God is doing among us and dreaming big visions about what God is doing, but instead we're talking about how we're going to pay the electric bill and what are we going to do about this, that's not a good place to be. So when you remember that, and this happens in your own personal life too, right? When you remember those times, when there are opportunities where there may be some time to stretch or to take a step forward in faith, we can start to look back and go, last time we took that big step forward in faith, that did not go so well. So then comes in the fear, right? We can be a little bit afraid that if we stretch too far, we're going to end up back in that unpleasant place where we were, and we don't want to end up there again. Now, some of that is true question asking. We should be good stewards and responsible. And it's hard sometimes to differentiate between being a good steward and having a little bit of fear. But if you look at those two little bits of things, right? We know we are blessed, but we're just small and a little bit limited maybe. And then we could be a little bit afraid about stretching too far. That kind of starts to put us in a little bit of a place like that third slave. And the question that I kept wondering about is, does he think that way because of the way he sees the master? If the master is a harsh man, then I should be afraid. If the master reaps where he does not sow, and he's going to crack down on me, why would I ever risk doing something? Because it's not going to end well. So he already has decided where he's going to end up, and because he has already decided where he's going to end up, in the story it says he will be cast out to where there's a weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think when you live in a place of fear, you're already weeping and gnashing your teeth, right? You're already in that place of anxiety, and that's not a good place to be. Because he has that fear, and because he has that sense of limitedness, he ends up being in that difficult place. So my question then is, let's revisit this parable and try to understand a little bit more deeply what has happened. So if you come back to this parable, it's important to me to understand, I always have to understand this, the scope of what is happening here is important. When I was a kid, and I heard these stories again and again about talents, there's other stories of talents, I always pictured in my mind's eye like a quarter. So the master comes and he gives 5 coins to the first guy, 2 coins to the second guy, and 1 coin to the third guy, and the third guy goes and use a little trowel and digs a little hole, drops his quarter in there and buries it. That's just how I pictured it. Then one day I was reading in my study Bible, and some of you have heard me talk about this before. A talent is 15 years' wages for a laborer. It is not a quarter. And so then I always think I need to put this into present day to give myself a sense of what's going on here. So in the present day, I don't know what a good number is. I picked $20,000. That's not a super high paying job. If you think common labor, maybe, is that fair? 20,000? So if that's the number you use, one talent is $300,000. 2 talents is $600,000. 5 talents is $1.5 million. So if you were to retell this story with that understanding, you would say a master walked up to 3 of his slaves, handed $2.5 million almost out to them, and then just left. And when he comes back, one of them has made the $1.5 million into $3 million because he just figured he was supposed to do something significant with it. One of them has taken $600,000, made it into $1.2 million because he knew he was supposed to do something significant with it. And the other one went and dug a big hole and put $300,000 in the ground and buried it because he was afraid. Well, what this tells us about the master, and what shocks me about the story, is he says, you have been faithful in how much? Little things. 1.5 million is little, right? You have been faithful in little things, now I will give you much. Which tells you that this master is extravagantly wealthy, and giving them all of this resource is nothing, right? It's just a little bit. It's not even a big deal. And then, when you give them, even the one that gets 1 talent, if someone handed you $300,000 today, would that be significant? Even the one who just gets 1 is handed a significant gift with some clear, though unspoken expectation that he ought to do something significant with it. And so I think what this story can teach us is a huge understanding of how God's grace works. God, as we talk about God, we can talk about God being extravagantly full of grace and love and patience and all of the characteristics we assign to God. There's so much of it that God can throw huge amounts of it at us, and that's just a little bit. And that's where we can talk about Jesus coming to join us and die on the cross. That's part of that huge gift of grace. And out of the other end of that comes this gift of life. So we are given this gift of life. These slaves did not earn this stuff. The master just walked up and gave it to them. And then did he micromanage it? Nope. Just left for a long time and came back to check on them later. So if we think about Jesus' death and resurrection as a huge gift of life for us, and that we are granted all of this blessing, and then the goal of it then is to do something significant with it. And if we don't, I don't know that God casts us out into outer darkness. I think that's our own choosing to go to that place. So then I come back around and say, okay, what have we then been blessed with as a congregation? Is it just a little? Well, if we compare it to God's extravagance, of course it's just a little, right? But then I really think we have to take an accounting of what we have, and to really think about what we have, and then how do we carry that out into the world with grace to do something significant. So some of what we have in the story is talents is money, but I don't think it's just about money. But some of what we do have is resources. I love this worship space. This is an awesome place to gather on Sunday mornings for me and worship here. But it's not just a worship space. Some of you have gathered in this place to commend your loved ones into Jesus' eternal care. Some of you have had your children or grandchildren baptized in this place. Some of you have been married in this place. That is more than just a building, right? But we also have a Montessori school that gathers here every day with little kids getting their minds opened and enriched because we are able to share this space with them. We have a hula that meets here regularly to gather in community and learn hula, but it's more than just hula, right? It's a whole gathering of community that support one another and walk with one another. We have other people that use our building, and there could be more of that. So this is a huge resource that we have, that we can do something significant with. We also have our financial resources, and when we talk about giving, whether it's to the boxes that we just did, or Christmas gifts, or the Animal Alliance, where we do different things, all of those are ways that we can do significant work in the world. But that is not the end of it. We have been gifted to be an intergenerational group of people, have we not? Which means we have wisdom amongst us, and that is life wisdom, and that is faith wisdom. Laura and I just had our 20th anniversary, and around some of you, we feel like we're just getting started. And do you realize what a gift that is? Well, we don't think about it that way. We don't look and say, gosh, we've got these people that have been married for 60 years, 50 years, 45 years. How are we using that gift to do something significant, to share it with people that are just getting started? We don't always do that because we don't connect that as part of the wonderful blessing of talents that we have been blessed with. If I had to pick one thing that we have been given, like if I had to take the story and say, Pastor, just pick one thing to represent the talents, I would pick the young people that are among us because they are amazing. Have you noticed that? We have assisting ministers, and I am totally okay with our assisting ministers writing their prayers because, right, that's a good thing to do, get it up through. All of the assisting ministers under the age of 20 just go up there and wing it. Did you know that? Because they're comfortable doing that, because they're amazing. And I'm not just talking about the talent they have in singing and the joy that they bring into this place, but sit down and talk to them. They have like super deep insights about faith. So the wisdom is not just the long wisdom of life, but it is also the eager, inspired, hopeful wisdom of life. And if you can think about how we can take those talents and do something significant with them and unleash them on the world's a pretty messy place right now. And we have a leadership crisis, and there's all kinds of terrible stuff going on. We have this whole little treasure. And if we can invest in them and pour ourselves into them and share with them this great gift that we have, we will send them out. And will they change the world? Absolutely they will, right? So those are some major gifts. But the other one that I want to talk about today is just the gift of our sense of grace. Anthony said it, right? When we gather here, we can be non-judgmental. We, as a Lutheran church that has a radical sense of grace, that is not normal. You know that, right? Wednesday night, I was at the YMCA as part of the diversity panel. And every time I go out in public and talk about how we think about God's grace being a completely free gift, and how we think about, as a denomination and as a congregation, the way we live into that grace, not a lot of people have heard the church talked about it that way. I've had conversations with people who will tell me all that outside stuff of church, and how it's judgmental and mean-spirited. And when I get done, I'm like, I don't want to go to that church either. The fact is, I've never had to, because I've spent my whole life in places that understand that this grace that we have been given is just this radical, amazing gift that we have been given to shape the world with. And I think every day we underestimate how powerful that gift is. So as we head into this next year, and as we have talked about this challenge, right? How are we going to send our kids to camp? And can we have an intern to raise a leader up to the church? And can we get this place spruced up so it can continue to serve us? All of that to me is the significant stuff that we can do to transform our world. So I want to revisit this, right? But I want to do it backwards. Instead of starting and saying, what are all the negative and maybe positive things people see, and starting to turn a page and go, well, we're good for small, right? We're doing all right. I'd rather start over here and say, who is God? Well, God is the one that comes and just dumps enormous blessing on us and says, go do something significant. That didn't say go do something significant with it in the story, right? It's just a gift. And we have an opportunity to go do something significant for us. So take stock, which we just did a little bit, right? But take stock of all of this amazing talent that God has put among us. And by that I mean the resources of theology and all of it. Then turn back over here and say, given that, how awesome are we? Pretty awesome, right? Are we limited? No, we're not, because God has opened us up to transform the world around us each and every day. And then, when we come back to the front, working backwards, we start with God's blessing, we think about how awesome we can be, then we say, well, how can we change the world and what do we want it to look like? And then we start to live in a space of dreaming and following where God is leading and finding God at work in the world, and we will be shocked when we get to the end of that. I was with Pastor Jared earlier this week and my colleagues, and he quoted somebody, I don't remember who, he said, we always in the short term overestimate what we can do, but in the long term we way underestimate what we can do and get done. And I think that's right, that we sell ourselves short on gospel and grace and what God can do among us. So the last thing I want to challenge you with today, on your way out, you will get handed a blank sheet of 11 by 17 paper. And in your prayer time this week, and as you think about how you're going to respond to all of these challenges, I want you to go home and fold it, just like that as I've been talking about today. But don't start on the outside. Start by reflecting on who God is and make some kind of depiction on that. And with this story, and just think about this extravagant grace that we've been gifted with. Then turn the page and say, what does that mean for me? If God is that awesome, how blessed and talented am I And then flip to the front and say, how can you participate in transforming the world? And as we all step into that, I think we will find the little hidden gem that runs through that story. Whenever they come, the master comes back, what did the two that did something significant get to step into? It's a three-letter word. The joy of the master. When we leap out into these places, we end up living in a space of joy. And that's not something we talk about all the time. It's not a word we use all the time in our culture. But living in the joy of God is an amazing thing. And I think that's what the invitation of this parable is, to step into that joy and live in that joy as we go. Amen.